I can't give you a definitive answer to that. There would be some. Usually the issues with off-stream storage is that we're not blessed as much as Europe is with the opportunity to do that. In southeast Queensland, regardless that Brisbane's relatively hilly, southeast Queensland isn't, and many of the opportunities that we might have had with regard to off-stream storing enough quantum of water to avoid a flood have already gone. They've been either consumed by the dams that we already have for their dual purposes, or they've been urbanised or peri-urbanised, and the social consequences of trying to move people out would probably be too large, particularly in a democratic community. Some of you who have been around long enough may remember a thing called the Wolfdean Dam, and that was going to be both a water supply and provide some flood mitigation capacity for the Logan area particularly. Politically, it was stopped, and now I understand that the area is so developed that it is not a viable option. So there potentially is some. I don't know the topography of southeast Queensland well enough, but I don't think it's going to be the panacea to our problem.
Paul, the Wolfdean Dam, that was the Wayne Goss era. Do you share those views that opportunity is now passed us by?
Dead and buried, I would say.
No.
As was Wayne Goss, because...
John Story at the back.
Tim, if I could just put on my Suncorp hat for a minute. Suncorp took the view a couple of years ago that it would offer comprehensive flood coverage both within Queensland and Australia. And it put in a lot of time and effort and a fair amount of expenditure basically doing the hard yards of both collating the existing flood mapping but also covering up an awful lot of gaps in the flood mapping. So it had to do its own work to provide a comprehensive system of flood mapping. I think we would have liked a couple of benign years to amortise that cost before we started getting hammered, but unfortunately that wasn't to be. I think having had the experience, I think we've found that our flood mapping has actually been pretty good, and if the Brisbane River had behaved and had stayed within the 4 metres, then the outcome would have been pretty much within expectations and pretty much within the parameters of our price risk or risk-based pricing. Of course, that extra half metre has proven to be a very costly half metre. So I think going forward from our perspective, what we're looking for are a few things. I think one is as much certainty as can be gathered from the management of Wivenhoe. I mean, we'll find out as the weeks develop up the road in George Street as to whether we are entitled to be disappointed as to the outcome, but certainly the outcome wasn't what we might have hoped. And going forward, we need to understand better exactly what are the limitations and what are the expectations that we can place on the Wivenhoe Dam in terms of mitigation. We need to understand the risk so that we can price the risk. Secondly, the flood mapping is a critical part, and obviously that is a task which is better done by governments at whatever level than private enterprise. And with comprehensive flood mapping available, well, I think you'll see all insurers coming into the market, and a deep market in this area obviously is to everybody's best advantage. But I think the other factor is town planning, and again I think there have been again expectations with respect to the 4 metres which haven't proven up. I think there have been misunderstandings as to what the impact of the flood would be in various areas where there have been soft spots where the impact has been far greater than had been anticipated. So, I think the planning is critical, and it not only frankly applies to flood. We've talked about Australia is a land of extremes, and if we go back a year or two to Victoria with the bushfires, and you see similar instances. Again, town planning, the ability to live in a tree-filled sylvan grove has actually proven very expensive, and there are costs, and those costs have to be either measured up or we have to accept reasonable constraints to the way in which we live. So just bringing it back to the water side of it, Tim, I suppose what I'm just putting a plea for is clarity in the mitigation, clearly defined flood mapping, clear town planning, and then I think we'll probably have a more sensible outcome the next time round. Thanks.
Gents, any comments?
One maybe with respect to the flood. I suspect, without any inside information, what's going to come out is a very strong incentive to do things by the book, and that suggests we better get the book. We better get the book right next time. Fairly clearly, I think we could have had a debate about discretion versus rules in the past, but I think due to partly, of course, there's always blame seeking in the aftermath of a flood, but it was, I think, for reasons I don't fully understand, particularly virulent this time round, and that's going to push us very much in the direction of a strict rule-based approach where everything is done according to very detailed specifications of the rules so that the operators are protected against subsequent comebacks. As somebody is saying, we have to go out and find the guy who wrote the book. Well, that guy's long since gone, I suspect, and so that's going to be the outcome. I think we will get that. We'll sacrifice any benefits of discretion we might have previously had.
Pat and then Paul.
I suppose my comment to that is it's been a lifetime journey for me to try and find certainty, and the only thing I've found so far is tax. Maybe death will come. And the reason I say that is if you look at the catchment the Brisbane drains, it extends basically from Blackbutt in the north, round to the back end of the Sunshine Coast, all the way down to Toowoomba, and then the border ranges down 150 kilometres south. Wivenhoe only catches part of that catchment. A significant proportion, no doubt, but I think less than 50%. And so whilst, and I agree with you, I'd love as much certainty as we can give to you, there will always be some uncertainty because there's a significant amount of uncontrolled catchment upstream of the city we live in. So that's something that we'll have to deal with somehow.
I guess, John, the options for improving certainty are not great. I mean, clearly you could add more height to Wivenhoe. I gather that was looked at perhaps in the first decade of the century. I don't know very much about it, but was rejected presumably on cost grounds. But clearly that would give you more storage capacity. You could do as we talked, you could reduce the storage component, and that does give you some more capacity and therefore some more certainty of handling X% of flood events. But at the end of the day, I think it was Pat who said, you're never going to be able to predict precisely how big some extreme events will be. You simply reduce the likelihood under those scenarios. So it seems to me, I mean, I agree with John. I think we will see more rule-based approaches, and I think there is an argument for doing a revised risk assessment of these two extremes of the supply versus the mitigation. But I think you're still going to end up with some sort of risk there. I mean, in Japan, that nuclear plant was designed to withstand a Richter scale 8 earthquake, and it had a tsunami breakwater to handle an 8-metre tsunami. Well, they got a 9, a Richter scale 9 earthquake, and they got a 14-metre tsunami because of where the earthquake was determined. Now, in hindsight, should they have predicted that was going to happen? I mean, it's a sort of a tough call. And it seems to me that no matter what you do, there is always some probability that an extreme event will simply be different from or more extreme than you've predicted. And so I don't think you're ever going to get the risk to zero. And I guess the question is, can you reduce it further than what Suncorp's had to and everyone else has had to cope with in this case? And I think the answer to that is yes.